Welcome to the Inquisitive Wren Podcast. I'm Shaw, your host. Join us as we explore diverse perspectives on the human experience, offering insightful interviews and deep reflections on philosophy, spirituality, psychology, from a bird's eye view on the essence of being. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Inquisitive Wren Podcast. It's Shaw, your host. Thank you for returning, and if you're new here, I do hope that you stick around. Today I have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Charlynn Ruan. She's a clinical psychologist and founder of the Thrive Psychology Group, and she joins us today to share her wealth of experience on empowering women to achieve mental and emotional well-being. She's a leading psychologist and CEO, and Dr. Ruan specializes in working with female founders, CEOs, and high-achieving women to help them thrive in their personal and their professional lives. So in this episode, I believe you'll discover very actionable insights on meditation, mindfulness-based treatments, EMDR, CBT, insomnia, and neuropsychology. We particularly focus on trauma states because that's one of her specialities. And Dr. Ruan dives deep into trauma recovery, postpartum depression, anxiety, lots of areas that can affect anyone at any time. You'll also learn about peak performance strategies, self-esteem building, and healing from complex issues such as attachment trauma and relationships with narcissistic parents. Whether you're navigating the journey of entrepreneurship, motherhood, or personal growth, Dr. Ruan's expert guidance offers practical tools for thriving at every stage. So tune in to transform your mental health and achieve balance, resilience, and fulfillment in your life. Whilst you're at it, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a comment, engage with us on social media. Go and follow Dr. Charlynn Ruan. All the links and information will be in the show notes. Leave us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. And continue to tune in for more empowering content. Here's the interview. Charlynn, thank you so much for joining me. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Thank you. So let's just start. I want to ask you, because mental health, I have found since the advent of the internet, I was around before then, it has become what I would describe as a hot topic. And when we all look back, it was always talked about. But I don't believe families had the language. We didn't have the diagnoses. We didn't know. So everybody talked about a relative or a neighbor or somebody at work who was a little bit odd, or they would call them certain things. Now we have the language. Now it's worldwide. Now we know that somebody could be depressed or could have trauma or mental health. So why is the conversation, why do you think the conversation around mental health should be had and should be openly and willingly discussed and continue to be discussed?
Yeah, I actually, it's such a mixed bag. There's pros and cons for it becoming such a, talked about thing. It's very positive in most ways. And at the same time, sometimes I feel like, well, sex is like this. We talk about it. Pretty much everybody does it. There's not a lot of good information actually going around when people talk. So it's like, how people are now, if we use a diagnosis so much to describe things that are just human, the diagnosis loses its meaning in some ways, or like knowledge is a starting point, but it's not always the change agent. In fact, it's rarely the change agent. So, knowing that you're depressed and then doing something about it are really different. And so sometimes now I think, and again, it's positive because it's hope, and it gives you a roadmap, and it gives you like words, and we can talk about it in a deeper way. But ultimately, relationship changes us, and we are changed by our daily life and being immersed with other human beings and doing that. So I have mixed feelings on the amount of information that there is about it, because to diagnose or to use the word is not to heal.
Such a brilliant point. And also, a lot of it's being misrepresented and misdiagnosed. For instance, narcissism. There's so much emphasis on that.
Yeah.
The information is just,
yes.
not true. I mean, it's a niche area. And if you haven't worked with people who are true diagnosed narcissists, then you probably don't know the ins and outs fully.
No, and it's one of those things where it's a psychological phenomenon where, like, you know a little bit about something, you feel like you know a lot. And the more you know about it, the more you realize you don't know. So I think there's a lot of people who feel like they know a lot because they're learning it, usually like via social media or watching shows or things, usually social media, and so it's positive in that it gives exposure, but then people think that they know, but then it can be really invalidating too, because then they'll just like, I don't like this person, they're a narcissist, and then they write them off and you lose the humanity, which is, as a good therapist, if you know the diagnosis, it's a zip code. It tells you an area where a person is experiencing something, but it tells you pretty much nothing about who they are as a human and their experiences and what's going to work to heal them. So I think it allows us to label and write off people sometimes, and we are not labels. We never are. And so that's the challenge. Again, I mean, I'm just focusing on the negative parts of it. There's a lot of positive stuff about, for one, there's a lot more people seeking therapy because it's less stigmatized and it's less, there's a lot of people doing it to just better themselves and not because it's a last resort, because they feel like they have no other choices and their life is so miserable that they must do that.
Yes, absolutely. We were at a picnic the other day and somebody was talking about they thought their son's girlfriend was a narcissist. And my friend said to him, no, she's not a narcissist. She's a Leo. There
you go. That's exactly, yes. Yeah.
So funny, but so poignant. And so she just brought it right back down to earth kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, yes. And I also think there's a really great book. I don't know if you've heard of it or read it. Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents.
Right.
And I recommend it to many, many, many of my clients because the entire book does not label, it doesn't use diagnoses, it doesn't use labels or anything. And it looks at everything through the lens of emotional maturity. And narcissism is really like a stunting from traumatic things or ways and experiences. And you probably have a genetic predisposition as well. But like most personality disorders, that's what they are. You're stunted at an age where, like a 3-year-old's not a narcissist. A 3-year-old is a 3-year-old. But if you put that behaviors in an adult, they're just a raging terror to everybody. And so I love that book because it looks at it as just maturity. Because sometimes when someone will say, I'm this or I'm that, or even write themselves off for someone else, if they could just say, I'm growing, I got to work on me, like maybe I don't have, a chronic rage problem. Maybe I have a maturity problem and I have to like dig in and do some work on myself and think about why I do that or how I can get more grounded. And we need to start celebrating emotional maturity in a way that we don't. And to have bad behaviors or to do things like that isn't necessarily to deserve a diagnosis always. I mean, diagnosis is not a lifetime sentence most of the time. And I also think that then people will just sit in it and own it, but that's only the first stage.
And as you say, a lot of people, you might know something, but everybody doesn't jump into therapy. I see so many comments, oh, they need therapy. This person needs therapy. You need therapy. This one needs therapy. People make up their own decisions, which brings me to, I want to start at the beginning with you. When we were at school, when I was doing my counseling course, we all talked about, well, why or how did we come to a counseling course? And most of us, it was just one of those things. It wasn't planned. You didn't grow up saying, I'm going to be a counselor like you do a nurse or a social worker or a doctor. So for you, where did you begin to think, right, I think I can help people. I think I've got something here besides your training, which I'd like you to talk about as well. But where did it start for you?
Well, You ever notice, like, the older you get in life, the longer your origin story is? So I had to think about it, like, consolidate. Because it was not a quick thing where I said to myself, well, actually, I had looked at it when I was like 20, and my cognitive passion, like the joy that I have for understanding the mind, that I think I recognized early because I read my entire Psychology 101 book the first day. I just started reading and I read the entire textbook from cover to cover, and I thought, wow, I love this. I'm so passionate about it. But because I was so young and I had other stuff that I was working on, I didn't have the confidence to go into it. So then I actually moved away from it and didn't do that and did a lot of other things in the meantime. And what I was always trying to do was help people, and I was always trying to make a difference, and I was always trying to, like, I mean, really ultimately use the gift that I had probably all along for being a psychologist, but I didn't feel able to hold the responsibility of what it was, or have the life experience or the wisdom to do it. And so I took a circuitous journey back to, like, okay, well, so I'm going to help people financially. Like, I'll help people, like, you know, I'll do, if I give them the work on giving resources and, like, working nonprofits and things like that. But what I kept seeing is that people would hit the wall of themselves. And it's much harder to change what's going on in our own mind than it is to change what's going on outside of us. Not that outside of us isn't hard to change, because that's very hard. But if we don't believe that we can change, or we have so labeled ourselves by our experiences that we are afraid to do something new, which is very human, then you can give someone all the resources in the world. If you can't help them to see themselves in a new way, it's really hard to make change. And so that internal stuff takes a lot. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to keep trying to do this and not succeeding, when at the end of the day I find myself finding ways to be a therapist in other ways that it would probably just be a lot more direct if I just went back to school and became a psychologist. And I did, and I had to work through the things that I had, the fears. And I find a lot of times, by the way, the things that people are most afraid of are usually linked to the things that they're most meant to do. Because, you know, we would not care really to have enough fear about the thing if it wasn't something that we were passionate about, or really fearing that we would fail at. So I had fears of public speaking, but now I love it and I have no issue with it. But it was because it was a gift that I had. You know, I had fears of the responsibility of sitting with someone and hearing about their deepest, darkest things, when really it was something that I was built to do. So, you know, it took a while. I needed to mature. Like I was saying, you know, I needed to become the person that I needed to be and have some life wisdom, which is always something good in a therapist.
And were there any challenges for you? Did you find that you stumbled? I mean, for me, psychology, it was the stats part. That was I didn't
No, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What about for
you? No, also didn't love stats. And my program was I did a PhD, which is very, like, research heavy, and a lot of people avoid doing that because of the stats part. So I could do it and I disliked it. So, you know, something that was beneficial to me doing it, coming back to, like, my PhD at an older age, in fact, older, I mean, like, my 30s, it wasn't, you know, but I was able to say, that's not my priority. That's not my gift. I'm going to do what I need to do it, but I'm going to really heavily focus on this. And so my knowing of myself, because I thought, well, I've lost time in my 20s doing other careers, doing the things, and then I see now how it all weaves together. You know, I can work with women in business because I worked in business. I can handle things in a different way and understand things. I can work with, you know, moms in a different way because I was, you know, became a mom in my program. Like, to me, what seemed like a very long road was actually perfect, because who I am in the room, I needed my life to do. It wasn't something I could learn in the classroom. So, but I was able, with my PhD program, I graduated in a program that usually takes 6 or 7 years in 4, because I was like, I know exactly what I want. I'm good at prioritizing what I want, and I don't feel the need to be good at all the things anymore, which I think is something that only comes with age, especially for women, because we're so pressured to be good at everything.
Which brings me to, I know your niche is you're very focused on helping, empowering women. And why do you think you were drawn to work specifically with women?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started it was partially, well, in the name of, you know, Thrive. It was because of the the way that I saw the psychology model being like a model of brokenness, symptoms, diagnoses. And I felt like, okay, where can you make the biggest impact? If you can impact women, they have the biggest impact on their family, right? They have usually the most impact on the children. And I think a lot of times they have the most, there's a lot of kind of research around this. If you economically empower women, that's the best way to raise the economy of an entire, group of people. So it's the same way. And what's funny is that as ended up happening with Thrive, whereas we have started very much working with women, now we see everybody. Because as you see women and they start to get better, then their partners, their brothers, their sons. And so now we see a lot of men, and they would come, even though we're, psychology for the modern woman, they're like, no, if you're good, I'm here. And so I used to call it, if you can get behind the pink curtain, of our branding, but they do. And they're like, and men are now flowing into therapy. So I do work with some men, but I also think for women, it's very complicated. You have to know about trauma. You have to understand hormones. You have to understand the psychological pressures that are specific onto women. You have to understand the societal issues. So I give the example of like, okay, someone comes to me and they say, I was diagnosed with postpartum depression. So the way that usually, again, so this is the diagnosis versus seeing someone as a whole person. What I'm looking at is, okay, do you have already trauma going into this? Did you have birth trauma? Did you have something medical that happened? Did you already have depression beforehand? Or is this something that happened now? Are you getting support at home? What is the financial situation you're in? Were you treated well when you went through your birth experience? Are you having enough sleep? Is your family showing up for you? Is this bringing up family stuff? By the time you go through all of that, you have to work on all of those different things and not just say, here's a pill. Because there's a lot of that way of looking at it is you're broken, or that's how I'll see women come in. They'll say, I'm broken. I'm messed up. What did I do wrong? And I'm failing my baby. And I'm having a shame spiral. And so helping a woman to see all of those things, you have to be well trained in all of those things, which, and I love men and I love working with men, but you can only specialize in so many things. Like sometimes people will be like, do you hate men? I'm like, absolutely not. No. But, that's my passion and specialty is helping women.
Now, you mentioned your group, you're CEO of Thrive Psychology Group, and is it right that you're based in both California and New York, but you also provide online help?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we started in LA because I was in LA. Now I'm not, but I was at the time. And, prior to COVID, like you were saying, so many things started during COVID, like we just were in person. But I always trying to, part of the whole therapy for modern woman was we were online. We had easy booking online. We had a lot of things that now are the norm that weren't. We were one of the first ones to be on Zoom because I thought, well, okay, if you can't make it out of your house or if you've got your kids, okay, then you can take therapy from your closet while your kids are out, like watching TV or whatever that might be. Like we have to meet people where they're at or they're not going to be able to come in. So then during COVID, we obviously went all online and then really didn't go fully back into the office. So we had 8 offices. Now we have 2. Then opened up in New York because I have a lot of passion for New York. I did some of my training there and school there. And we have a lot of women that go back and forth, clients that go back and forth. And then this is something you may not know about being in England, but in America, they call SIPAC. So it's interstate reciprocity. So prior to that, you could only practice in the state you were licensed in. So if I had a client move from California to Wisconsin, I would have to end therapy because I wasn't legally allowed to continue seeing them. So during COVID, they started this pact between all these different states where now you can, if you are residing in one of the states and you are licensed in that state, you can get reciprocity in 42 states. So I was like, this is ridiculous. Like our antiquated laws about what you're able to do from state to state is really pretty ridiculous with how mobile people were, and it was creating a lot of interruptions in care. So I made an effort to hire people that could do that, and then I was able to do that. And yes, now we see people all over the country, which is great because it really increases access to care.
Never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button right now. Thank you for your support. You make this podcast possible. Now, back to the show.
It is indeed, and really, that's a huge problem. Access to care, and you mentioned, the differences here, and here you know about our National Health Service. I'm sure the NHS, it's free here, and CBT is offered on the NHS. You can, I think they start you out with 12 sessions or so, and also you don't have to be referred by your GP. You can just, and it's done by borough. So, I think that's really good. It's really helpful. Yeah. However, when it did start, I was skeptical because they put, of course, it was nice guidelines here in the UK. It was means tested, I would say. That's the easiest way to say it. So they tested it out, and the NHS found it was the best sort of band-aid, I think, for depression, anxiety, try to cover the gamut, and also trauma. But they did not include EMDR. So I want to come to that because I know you're...
Really?
Yes.
Wow. So that they specifically don't cover that when they do?
No. Well, actually, no, that's now changed. So I was talking when they first started, which is about, I suppose, 15 years ago now. But it's not available in every borough. It's only available in some boroughs. So you can get EMDR on the NHS, and I've referred people, but you have to live in a particular borough. So that's how, when you were talking about how it was, so here, and, therapy is free for a few sessions. Mostly people have to pay. A lot of people do not have the means to pay. And here, it can range from £60 for the 15-minute session up to £200. It just depends on where you are. If you're in Harley Street, which is a very, it's like Mayfair, it's very high upper class, you're going to be paying upwards of £300-400 a session. So a lot of people cannot afford that. I don't know what the fees are in the States.
Ours is, as it is apt to be with our insurance model, terrible. Because what ends up happening is we pretty much don't offer any sessions for free. As our medical care is not covered. There's Medicaid, Medicare. That's a mess to deal with. They actually reimburse fairly well. But what ends up happening is that the insurance companies reimburse so little that fewer and fewer therapists are on it. And if you're going to find someone who actually takes insurance, which you have to have through your employer, so that's a limited number of people who have that in the first place, you're not going to get the best trained. You're not going to get, because the amount of work you have to put to get reimbursed by insurance companies is so high. You have to hire a billing person. You get reimbursed very low, so then you have to have an enormously high caseload just to survive financially. And they really nickel and dime the therapist, and then they can claw back it's not a good system. And so what ends up happening then is so I'm out of network, which means that people pay me directly, but then they can seek reimbursement from their insurance company. But then the insurance companies can make that difficult, and that's a challenge. So as much as we have a lot of therapists in the U.S., we still have an access problem for that reason, because there's a divide between what it takes to be able to afford to live and what you can make financially, and then if that's not feasible with insurance, then it means that you can't take insurance, which means that fewer and fewer people take it. It's a real problem. Our medical system is a mess. I know that yours has issues too, but it's such an unfortunate thing, especially with mental health care. They've been very resistant to supporting people as they could, which would save them an enormous amount of money down the road, because they still end up paying that. They just pay it in emergency room visits when someone has a panic attack, there's paying it on the back end.
Exactly that. And a few years ago, they did cut a lot of mental health services. And people were just ending up in A&E, of course, because, they were struggling. So, and then, of course, that's a drain on resources. So, yes, there's a huge issue. This sounds like it's worldwide.
Yes, absolutely. No, I'm sure. Yeah, the good news is what you were saying before about, the people know about mental health care, now, and they know about mental health diagnoses. So that does make them savvier consumers, and it does make them more willing to advocate for themselves, and there's less shame around that. So hopefully that has a positive increase in actually having more services offered, or, governments and insurance companies having to provide more. Yes. They're resistant to it, but there's more willingness, and, is there more pressure from society around that, then they'll be like, oh, okay, this is a thing. We can't ignore this. We do have to actually deal with this. And so that's good.
And for people who are struggling out there, who are thinking, okay, they've dealt with something for years and years and years, it's not going away, they know they need to go into therapy. How do you approach? The phone call comes in and they say, look, this has been going on for years and years. I want to come to therapy. I don't know if I can afford it, or how many sessions will it take?
Yeah. I try to be, now we have an intake coordinator who does, will help people with matching. And we try never, if someone can't afford us, like, we'll try to have different therapists at different levels, and so that helps, different levels of training, different levels. So that's hopefully to make it more affordable, but also keeping like a list of places that then are like, subsidized in some way where they can provide lower fee therapy. And so we try to never turn away someone and be like, oh, well, you can't afford us. So, when we try to give them some other resources. But the question of how many sessions will it take, I also have like just a frank conversation with the person of like this, if the stress of the financial stress of doing therapy is more than what it will benefit you, then let's help you find something that's less stressful financially. Because I don't want someone being stressed or having, other basic needs not being met because they're seeking therapy. And then also if they say, I've only got this amount, then I'll say, okay, well, this is what we can work on in this period of time. And then I'm not someone who pressures somebody to stay in long term. It's more just like, there usually is a list of things. It's such a hard balance because with the symptom reduction model, it's like 12 sessions and you're out. 8 sessions and you're out. But if you're dealing with complex trauma, like you said, someone who's coming in, I've been dealing with this my whole life and it hasn't gotten better, the chances that it will be 100% better in 8 sessions, are not that great, right? So you can make a lot of progress in that. So I try to be very realistic with people and say, we can probably do these things. Those other things you can either push off to later. I can give you books, resources, workshops, lower, price things that you can do, and it can be a stepping stone to just your whole journey of self-care, which is really way more than I'm going to be doing with them in 1 hour of therapy. It's really to help them build the rest of their life to support that. And I really encourage people to do all the other things. And so, usually people will decide to try it or to do the amount that they can afford, or they'll go to someone that we recommend, which is totally, I think people need to do what works for them.
That's great that you do a sliding scale, depending on what they can afford and things like that. It's wonderful. Which brings me to, I want to ask you, what are some of the big, I say big because they're probably quite pressing for people, mental health issues that people tend to come to see you to treat?
Well, my specialties tend to make it more specific. Part of the reason I started Thrive was because I knew I couldn't specialize in everything and do well in all things. You have to pick, it's like they train us generally, and then you really have to pick something that you have to be excellent at. Otherwise, you're probably not good at anything. You have to be excellent at something, because you could go to town, like the amount of time that I spend and the knowledge I have around trauma, right? I could not do that for absolutely every specialty. So that's part of why I built a group where there's someone for each specialty. So then that means that each of us draw different people to us. So, but the things that we tend to see people come in for therapy, it tends to be, usually it's not, I'm just feeling a certain way. It's that my life has become untenable and I'm thinking maybe it's something that I'm doing, right? So it's like, okay, I'm seeing a pattern. I love when somebody comes in at 30, or like 35, and you're like, okay, no, it's partially me. It's like, I did say it was my ex, but after 5 exes that are exactly the same, it might be me. It might be a little bit me. And so then they're willing to like work on themselves and think like, okay, there's some stuff that I thought I was okay with, and I thought that I could like just ignore or perform my way out of, or just be like, I'm not going to marry someone like my parent, but obviously just saying that to myself is not enough. And they're really willing to like dig in and say like, okay, I need to change me, so I can change my life. And so that's a very general way of saying it, but it tends to be something happens. Like they're parenting in a way that they don't love, or they're, just went through a divorce, or they're just not succeeding at dating, and they're like, what's going on? After a while, I have to look at me. And so, but that's great. That's amazing. Like we don't think about this when we think of empowerment. Accountability is like kind of the least popular part of empowerment, but it's so empowering to say, I don't have control over this. What do I have control over? Let me fix those things. And, that takes all of our time anyway to work on the things we have control over.
And I suppose, is that some of, or part of, some of the most pressing issues that people come to see you for? Things like self-esteem, empowerment, or is it mostly trauma-based?
Well, for me, because I'm a trauma therapist, it's what's that saying, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I mean, I tend to, a lot of things are trauma-based. And trauma is an injury, not an illness. So it's healable. And so that's, again, maybe that's why when I see people saying I have a diagnosis, there's nothing I can do about it, I just don't think that that's an empowered, healthy way of looking at it, because there are, our diagnostic system is clumsy at best, right? So it's, and it's also very symptom-based for the most part. We're not looking at why, and someone can have the exact same symptoms as someone else and a completely different reason for it. Like I was saying with the postpartum depression. And we need to, the diagnosis doesn't tell us about why it's happening, which then limits our ability to actually correct it and heal it.
Because, I suppose, like you say, we can't, as therapists, everybody can't treat everything. And so I always encourage people, when they go to somebody's website and they see 101 things that they treat, okay, some of those things may pop up if you're helping somebody to stop smoking or something, or panic attacks. Okay, maybe something will pop up, but you can't be an expert in all of it. No. I mean, that's that way in the medical system. I don't know why that is a shocking thing to us as therapists, why people don't think that. If we're dealing with something, if we want to have heart surgery, we're not going to go to a generalist. So that's why would that be different if we're dealing with something very serious? Now, you want to have knowledge of all the other things. There's a few things that I think that, I have a neuropsych background. I find it extremely helpful to understand the brain and why things happen, and to give people their operating instructions and the nervous system. And then, and then that can overlap all kinds of things like anxiety and depression, and all sorts of things are impacted by that. But that's just understanding the vehicle, right? It's not necessarily understanding all the treatment models or everything that goes with that. And trauma is a very specific, it also, I think that's a term that gets misunderstood. People say, oh, I've got trauma. Okay, bad things happening to you aren't trauma. Trauma is your response. Trauma is what happened after. And it's what happens in the brain as a result of the bad thing. And it doesn't always result in trauma as a response. So it's again, I have trauma. Well, yes, everybody has had bad things happen to them. It's what happens around you and how you make meaning of it and how other people show up for you. And were you able to successfully fight, flight, freeze, and then escape it? And were you able to have other people show up for you? That determines whether it becomes post-traumatic growth or PTSD. Really, they started studying the concept of post-traumatic growth because they were like, wait a second, so this thing, similar thing happened to two people. This person is really severe PTSD. This person has, the trajectory of their life has seemed like they used it all for something positive. What happened, right? So it was just anecdotally, they looked at it and they're like, something's different. Then they actually created a whole area of study to figure out what are the changes of it. And part of it is, do they make meaning of it? Does it go in with their world concept, right? And that means, because there's a whole process. When you're in the stuff and you're in the mix of the hard thing, everybody's like, yay, growth. But, it's, if you look at it as okay, I'm going through something terrible. Is there anything I can get out of it? Either I can help other people. It grows me in some way. Something was removed. Something else will replace it. Do we grow wise from it and deep and grounded and able to handle hard things? Or do we not, and we get stuck in it and identify heavily with the hard thing that happened to us and feel still being punished by it, still, even after it has passed? And that's part of
doing trauma therapy is helping people to do that work so that it becomes a part of an overall narrative that's very empowering and where their whole life makes sense and they're not stuck in the hard thing.
Speaking of treatment models that you mentioned a moment ago, now I know you all do CBT, mindfulness, EMDR. So you treat conditions such as OCD and everything else in between, pretty much. Is there anything that people need to know? Some people will be listening to this and thinking, right, okay, yeah, I get it. But where do I start? What do I do? I've got OCD. What do I do? How can mindfulness, because there's so much on the internet and Instagram showing mindfulness and so much talk about meditation. And so what would you tell people? Where should they start?
Well, I mean, I would say it's like that's part of I also think people they have the information, like what you're saying on the internet, if like I have this, then you need to talk to a person about it. So, if they're going to be coming to us or to any therapist, first of all, I think asking good questions. We give consultations and then helping the person. Like, if you're not the best person to help them with something, like I have worked very heavily in OCD in the past, but it's not my specialty now. So I would actually send them to someone else on my team. So, it's that. And then having someone usually just come in, and they don't have to have their own roadmap, but to say, this is what's going on. And then just sharing that with the therapist. And then, that's how I do. It's like, tell me what's going on. Then I'll say, okay, this is some things that I'm seeing. What about if we work on this and this? I think I can help you. And there's times when I'm not the best person, but I can help you find the best person. You also don't want to go to a therapist who I think is like trying to sell their whatever it might be. You know what I mean? Like I just don't think that's healthy. So, I get that as therapists, there could be, especially when people are starting out, the stress of trying to make money and all of that, but it's just wrong to bring on somebody that you don't have competency in what they are, because then you're just going to it's just not ethical. So, but for me, I try to and say, okay, this is what I see. How does this sound to you? And then inevitably people ask me well, what does therapy with you look like? And that's always such a hard question to answer, because I say, it's more like jazz, right? So you have to be extremely good and well trained in different things in order to do jazz. But it's not classical music where you're trying to hit all the notes. It's a collaborative process, and it looks so different for each person. So I try to share just more of my values and approach of it, and personality hopefully comes through, and then what my specialties are, and then we go from there, and then let them have decision. Yeah. And I make a very big deal with my team of do not let somebody do not underestimate how hard it is to make the first call. So I'll say, don't reschedule their consult. Don't, if you're saying to yourself, if they write a note and you're like, I don't know if I can help this person. Well, you are the person. You're the person that they're talking to. So find a way to help them and be part of their journey, even if it is to give them a little bit of encouragement and some steps for what they can do next. And I think that's just part of our ethical imperative as therapists, is that we need to help them to the next place. Yeah. And, even when it doesn't serve us, that's the whole point of what we're doing, and so to actually help people.
Hi all, thank you so much for watching. I just wanted to say a large percentage of people who are watching right now are not subscribed. So please, please, please click that subscribe button, subscribe to the channel. Turn on your notifications so when a new episode comes out, you'll get a notification, you won't miss it. Also, click that like button. It really does make a difference. And finally, on all podcast platforms, leave us a 5-star review. It really does help us to keep going. And if there are any topics you'd like me to discuss, do let me know. See you next time. So for something like trauma recovery, anxiety management, how do you begin to help someone in that area to recover?
Yeah. Well, and again, anxiety is a tough one because it's a catch-all and there could be different reasons for it. So somebody can have anxiety, or it's called anxiety, or they use that word when it's really a PTSD response. They're hypervigilant because of bad things that have happened to them, and they're their brain is in that process and their body is stuck in this dysregulated place. And so that's different than some other reasons behind anxiety. There's genetic causes for anxiety. There is intergenerational transmission of anxiety. There's a lot of research that shows if you have a very anxious mother, the baby tends to show signs of it at 9 months. So because we learn emotions through social referencing. So there's a lot of different reasons for anxiety. So first, it's helping the person to understand what's going on. I love, like, my clients are I think a lot of people are very smart now about trying to understand themselves. And so I really try to empower with knowledge around that. Most of my clients are great about following up with it. I'll say, hey, I think it might be this. And they're like, I read a book on this before the next time. And it's wonderful because they always they're taking ownership of their path. And I really try to encourage them to do that. But it's, again, trying to understand what's going on, trying to look at the different parts of it. So if someone's having anxiety, and when I look at their life history and trying to understand what's causing it, I can see that it might be caused by trauma. So we'll use that just as an example as one of the causes. So they had something happen to them and they've been holding that. And it's really hypervigilance that's manifesting out. So I'm going to help them to look at it as like, okay, your brain responded in a certain way to this thing that happened that was terrible. And then it got stuck in that place because, your brain will hold on to those triggers until it knows it's safe. And that's EMDR helps you to release that and to resolve the trauma, which then helps with the symptoms there. But then on top of it, your body gets used to certain chemicals. So it'll be much more cortisol sensitive. You'll be used to having more adrenaline, used to having like a keyed up way of being. So sometimes it's also about helping them to soothe their nervous system and to realize, oh, I'm in fight or flight and I'm just looking for something to be in fight or flight about. But the fight or flight, I woke up with that. That's something that's old. That's something that my nervous system has a pattern of being in this way. So then I try to help them with other ways of soothing their nervous system and really like helping from the bottom up. They talk about bottom up and top down, just understanding something is fine, except that your prefrontal cortex just shuts off as soon as you're triggered. And then you're not your smartest self to understand. You're just like in hypervigilance. And so helping them then to do daily practices of regulating themselves until their body starts to do it more and more. And it's a process of rewiring. It's physical therapy, really, for your nervous system and your mind. Yeah. So, it's a multi-step approach. It sounds like it takes a long time. It doesn't take as long as you think, but it does. But still, it's a whole body, whole nervous system. And then also the way that they relate in their lives are different because now maybe they communicate boundaries in a way they didn't think they could because they didn't feel they were safe. So then that changes. It really is like a holistic way of treating it.
For you, is that a part of the process, incorporating mindfulness to help people learn how to regulate? Or what would be the methodology as such around incorporating mindfulness?
Yeah. Well, and DBT is such a great model, and it's so and really treating it. There are very few good treatment methodologies for personality disorders, and that one is great. And it's also can be then, of course, used for so many other things. And so I think there's a lot of basis for it. I use a lot of principles and models from that because sometimes people will come in, I want to deal with my trauma because they heard the word trauma, right? And it's like, okay, you have to create safety in your life and in your own body before you go into the things that made you feel unsafe in the first place. It's very much that, become the woman you needed as a little girl. There's that dysregulation. It would just be too severe and too destabilizing to go into, EMDR without having those other skills. And EMDR talks about that even. When you get trained in EMDR, they talk about you need to do a lot of resourcing and grounding and, all that work to be safe in your own body so that it doesn't feel like all the things when you get dysregulated, and you can it's that holding of the parts of yourself where this feels all encompassing and I feel like a child who is lost in the terribleness and I'm so empty and I'm so overwhelmed. But then part of you is but it's okay, you're safe now, the adult part. And it's that part's work of being able to do both and make safety for yourself. So, but that does require the ability to regulate your own nervous system first.
Right. Can you speak on that just a little bit about the EMDR part? Because we were coming to that. I would like people to understand how it's not a Band-Aid, number one, but it's very powerful. Very, very powerful work. And if you're not stabilized enough, it could cause more trouble than you've already got as such. So can you talk on that just a little bit? How does it work and how can people benefit?
Yeah, I mean, so it's such it's been around for forever, and then I think a couple famous people did and started talking about it, so then it became well known, and then, like people started going for it, as they should. It's an extremely effective therapy modality, just like DBT is. And they both, in some ways, there's some overlap in what they treat, right? Because obviously, with borderline especially, there's a lot of trauma that's involved with it. And so, and I see people that have gone through DBT and then come for EMDR. And that's a great thing because they have the skills, they've got the skills to regulate themselves through the process. But EMDR is, so it helps to understand, to talk about, like for your listeners, to talk a little bit about trauma. So when something bad happens to you, your brain holds that memory in a different place. It doesn't go into your hippocampus. It's just part of your filing cabinet of memories. It gets stuck in your amygdala and some other spots in your brain, and it's like a time capsule. So, and the purpose of that is that, so if we were like cavemen and you got attacked by like a lion, it would behoove you to make very quick responses to anything that is furry, growls, to be hypervigilant at the time of day when it happened, all of that, right? Because your brain is designed to keep you safe, not to keep you happy. And so it keeps that. But then the problem is that then if you don't ever release it or feel safe enough to release it, it'll expand. And so then you start being afraid of all times of day and all animals and and that's where it can expand. And also it makes you feel, for lack of a better word, crazy pants, because whenever it gets triggered, you can go from feeling super stable and secure and happy and powerful to like a little child. And it's like time traveling to your worst place in your life. And it has these triggers and it's hard to know when it's going to come up. But again, your brain's not trying to hurt you, it's trying to protect you. And if you, in the moment, were able to complete the trauma, so say if that lion attacked you and you didn't just have to freeze and curl into a little ball and have something terrible happen and then be rejected by the people around you, if people stepped in and helped you to fight off the lion and you successfully did that, it probably would not become PTSD around lions. It would become part of your narrative around, I've got people who have my back and I am strong and I can handle things. But it gets arrested in that place. And so especially when trauma happens when you're little, and this is now we're starting to realize that some of the things we don't recognize as trauma are the most traumatic. Because as little kids, our only safety is our caretakers. So to be separated from our caregiver or for them to reject us is death. I mean, it is. Like, you can just kill the child by leaving them out by themselves. So to be rejected or shunned or shamed or, that can get, especially if it's a repeated thing and there's no repair made by the caregiver, that can end up being really a complex developmental trauma. And what's really hard about that when it's related to love or it's related to attachment, I work a lot with attachment trauma and developmental trauma. The thing we crave the most, which is human connection, is the thing that hurt us. And so we'll want it, be afraid of it, bounce out, sabotage it, not trust people, not know who to trust the wrong person, have a bad experience, then be like, I knew I couldn't trust anyone. And it creates this whole bad, then you're making, then you've got much more traumatic things happening. So with EMDR, what it allows you to do is to sit down, and the way that it works, it uses bilateral movement. So you can either do it with the eyes, or I like to use buzzers. You can do it with, hearing, and it helps your brain, like the way that it processes it moves energy between two lobes of the brain. It helps you to take it out of your amygdala, put it in your hippocampus. You don't forget it. Sometimes you remember things you didn't remember before. People always ask me, is this a way to do reclaiming of memories? And I'm like, memories is the sticky thing, right? So what you remember as a kid, and because you're trying to think that you're going to remember this memory with your adult information, you may not have even known what it was, so you didn't label the thing that happened to you. Your memory is going to be messy and fuzzy, so not using it as investigative journalism about your own life history, but instead looking as this is how it imprinted, this is what comes up for me. Then it goes into your hippocampus and it becomes part of your story. And it doesn't, then when you remember it, you might be sad, you might be like, oh, that sucked, or you might be angry, but you're not going to feel 5 years old again. Because now it's your adult mind and it's integrated with the rest of your mind. So it's super powerful to do that. There's very few things that do that so powerfully, and it really increases your brain plasticity to do that. I would say other than that, I mean, aside from maybe like a psychedelic assisted therapy, which also increases brain plasticity and is used a lot for trauma, you're hard pressed to find another modality that's going to get beyond the bottleneck that is our verbal system. Because we can only get so far with talk therapy for trauma. And so we have to work with the body.
Lots of hospitals are experimenting a lot at the moment, psilocybin and everything else. There are trials, active trials going on, so people can go on websites and sign up. Oh gosh, there'll probably be a flood now to those websites.
I've had people asking you. Everyone's so interested right now. Again, though, it's good if done in the proper context with the proper people. And until there's like, in the US it's the same. There's a couple of states where it's legal, and there's a lot of states where it's decriminalized, and there's states where it's just illegal. But you know, you can be part of a study, or you can go to a state where it's legal. But it's tough until it is legalized and made part of like the therapy modality. I'll end up with people that go to a music festival, and they're like, so I was doing such and such, and then I remembered this memory, and now I can't stop thinking about it. I'm like, okay, just remembering it is not healing. Again, you know, that's the first start of really working on it. So it can be very like scary and destabilizing for people in the wrong context.
And a lot of people use the sounds as well, the bilateral sounds. You wear headphones and you use that. You specialize in adult children, with narcissistic parents. And so but what is that work like in just a summary?
Yeah, I mean, again, the term being overused, like I'm very careful to only use it when it is accurate, right? And then when it's accurate, it's so accurate. Like, you know, and it causes a lot of pain. It can be very different depending on if it was a mother or father. There's just starting to be more kind of awareness around what it's like to have a narcissistic mother. It's one of those diagnoses that was very gendered. Just as ADHD, I think, was very gendered in the direction of little boys were overdiagnosed, girls were underdiagnosed. And that was with narcissism because of how we thought of it and what was supported in society. We thought of just your classic, boldly narcissist, you know, kind of braggadocious man, really is what we thought. When really, like, having a narcissistic mother, especially for a girl, is horrible. And, you know, it's hard to actually like look at it and to dig into it, but the impact that it has is really profound on the adult children of narcissists. Any personality disorder, but definitely narcissism, because one of the key job requirements of being a parent is empathy, the ability to truly see your child and support them for who they are, and to grow with them. And those are all things that are really at odds with that, you know, psychological makeup. And also it's a very stubborn one, you know, and very hard to treat. There's not a lot of good treatments, and nor do they typically seek treatment unless mandated or in couples therapy. So those are the types that you see people. But it's hard because usually the children of narcissists, although terrified of becoming a narcissist, usually don't become narcissists. They tend to become people who sacrifice for others or give too much, or like have their sense of self is really damaged in a different way. And so part of it is to say, don't worry, your chances of becoming a narcissist yourself are very low. It's going to go the other direction. So, and again, now that everybody knows the term narcissist, they're likely to have been called that by the narcissist in their life. So, you know, whenever they express a need, being told that they're narcissistic, which is very harmful because they're terrified of becoming that thing.
Charlynn, this has been absolutely fascinating. I know a lot of the viewers, the listeners will get so much from this. Yeah. And Thrive is, I mean, where did you guys come up with Thrive psychology? Thrive's a powerful word.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about it a lot. I thought about, like, how do I convey not just function, so we say don't just survive, thrive. So really, my husband and I sat around and talked about it, and was we going to say flourish? Are we going to say, what are we going to say? We're like, thrive. Okay, that's exactly what I'm trying to accomplish with people, is to help them move beyond just functioning and silently suffering to like thriving, whatever that looks like for them.
And online in 40 states, primarily with women. As you've heard today, it's with everyone, really.
We see children too. Yeah, we see children, families, couples. We do some testing. We've really expanded. It's really, we followed what the need is. And if someone needs it and we can do it, and someone on our team specializes in it, we do it. So yeah, we'll see children. Maybe not very young children because we don't have the setup for play therapy, but young teens, probably down to maybe 9 or 8 is probably the youngest person that we have being seen right now. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, great. Well, tell us the website.
So it is mythrivepsychology.com.
Perfect. And follow Charlynn on all social media.
And we make a lot of content on there to be helpful and to educate people and to try to, give good, high quality education around just all the things we've been talking about today.
I think what you guys are doing is amazing. On the website, it has everybody who works there, a bit about them, what they treat. Also, which I really admire, you've got everybody's training there, and I think that's hugely important. Charlynn, thank you once again. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
And there you have it. Another really insightful interview, learning so much from this episode. And my takeaway from this is, if you're struggling, just reach out. And Charlynn's website is a great place to start. You can access any therapy, you really can, but it will be an investment. So I would encourage you all to think about that. As much time and money as you spend on things that you end up throwing away very quickly or that are wasteful, you could spend time and money on your mental health, your physical health, and your overall well-being. It is an investment, so try and see it as such. So that was my biggest takeaway from this. I'd love to hear about yours. What did you take away from this interview? What stood out for you that Dr. Ruan had to say? What was the contribution like for you today? What was listening to the interview like for you today? I hope it's been helpful, but do let us know. I love to hear from you. It's always brilliant to hear from you all. Thank you once again, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Inquisitive Wren Podcast. I hope you found it insightful. If you did, I'd love for you to share it with a friend who might enjoy it too. Don't forget to share it on social media. It really helps us reach more people who resonate with our content. If you haven't already, make sure to follow the show. It's the best way to stay connected and help our Inquisitive Wren community grow. I'd also love to hear from you. Leave a rating and a review to let me know your thoughts, and be sure to follow so you never miss the latest episodes or behind the scenes content from the Inquisitive Wren. Thanks again, and as always, stay curious.